Welcome. Welcome to the First Universalist Church of Rochester, where we are called to nurture the spirit and serve the community. Whoever you are welcome here. Wherever you come from, you are welcome here. Whomever you love, you are welcome here. Whether you are here with us in this sanctuary or joining us online from across town or across the world, you are welcome here. All of you is welcome here. Thank you for bringing your fabulous selves to worship with us today. It is good to be together. We acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door and part of the Haudenosaunee people, on whose ancestral lands First Universalist now stands. This week, our minister, the Reverend Lane Campbell, is away, but we are very fortunate to have the Reverend Dr. Richard Gilbert preaching for us. As many of you know, Dick Gilbert is a member of this congregation and minister emeritus of our sister congregation, the Unitarian Church across town. He is widely known and esteemed within our faith as a preacher, writer, and social justice advocate. It is a joy to welcome him once again to our pulpits. If you are here for the first time this morning, we especially welcome you. We have a visitor's form that can be found in the chat for folks online, and that can be found in your order of service for folks in person. Please fill out the form so we can offer you a welcome beyond this worship service. You can put paper forms in either of the offering boxes in the sanctuary, either during the offering or at any other time. So now let us take a moment here in the sanctuary to turn to our neighbor and offer a greeting. Please respect people's physical distance and obtain consent before reaching out for a handshake or hug. We encourage elbow bumps and placing a hand over one's heart while making eye contact. Let us greet one another. Well, that's it. Please join me now in our opening hymn, number 298, Wake Now My Senses. Looking back over the past 20 months, I am so proud to be a member of this congregation. I am so proud of how we have continued to show up for each other and our community. We have tried new things, many new things, some of which have worked well and sometimes not so much. We've been frustrated when the audio didn't work online or our internet died, when there was no electrical power at the park shelter, when cold rain blew in on us under the tent at Winton Road. And most of all, maybe when we just wanted a hug and for things to be the way they used to be. We have said 1,000 million times, I can't hear you, you're muted. And yet, we have persisted. We show up because we need one another and because we need this faith that helps us to live lives of meaning and connection, a faith that helps us carry on even when we are tired or lost, even when we don't know exactly where we are going or when we will get there. A faith that reminds us that we are held in a larger love. In the name of the love that moves between us and among us, come, let us worship together. Would Bill Elwell please light our chalice? As we light our chalice here at First Universalist Church and in your own homes, will you join me in saying our chalice words in unison? May we be a people of welcome, here to grow in heart and mind and spirit, and may we reach out to serve our community. Please join me in our affirmation of faith, followed by the doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. With the meaning of life, bless the covenant with each other and with all. Isn't it great to hear the feel the vibrations of the organ? These words are from Starhawk. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned. We can only catch glimpses of it from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without the words catching in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Here at First Universalist, one way we join our strength to do the work that needs to be done is through our financial gifts to support the life and work of our church. You are invited to bring your offering to the offering boxes in the front and back of the sanctuary. If you would like to give online, if you're here, please scan the QR code in your order of service or by the box. On Zoom, you can click the link in the chat to give to First Universalist Church. And of course, you can always feel free to mail a check to the church. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
It is so good to see all of you here, all of us together in person, and you too who are with us virtually, and even a few folks in the balcony. I haven't seen that in a long time, high up there. Since the children are outside for worship today, I thought we might omit it from the service. I discussed this with Michelle, but I was told that, well, the adult congregation enjoys it too. And I thought, yeah, perhaps more than the sermon. We'll see. In any case, here is a story from the Jewish Talmud about locating a synagogue, although it works equally well for locating a church. A long time ago, there were some people who were looking for a place to locate their church. but they did not know where to build it. David and Joseph were brothers who farmed together. Joseph had a wife and 5 children and lived in a large farmhouse. David lived alone in a small house. One fall, they were busy harvesting their crops. 100 bushels of wheat had been tied up and then divided, 50 bushels to each brother. 50 bushels were stored in David's barn and 50 in Joseph's. And then Joseph said, "David, come home with me for supper tonight." And after a pleasant evening, David went home early. On the way home, David thought, how good my brother is to me. It isn't fair for me to take half of the whole supply of wheat. He has 5 children to feed and is so good to me. I know what I'll do. He'll never know. So that evening, when he thought his brother's family was asleep, he strapped 5 bundles of wheat on his back and started back to Joseph's house and deposited the 5 bundles in Joseph's barn. Now, Joseph had been thinking too, I don't think it's fair. I have a whole family to help me. When I get old, they will do the work for me. But my brother, he will have no one. I should have given him more wheat. He needs it. And so before dawn, Joseph went to his barn, felt around for the wheat, and strapped it to his back and made his way to David's house. And when he came back, he stopped at his barn door and looked at his wheat and counted. Why, look how much wheat I have. I don't need any more. This looks like a lot of wheat. And he counted and counted until he counted to 100. But I don't understand. We must have divided them unevenly at the beginning. I've only given my brother what was his rightful half, and I wanted to give him a present. I know what I'll do. Tonight, I'll make him a real present. I'll be generous this time. I'll give him 10 bundles of wheat. And so on it went with the unsuspecting brothers, back and forth. The more wheat bundles they gave away, the more they had. And then one night, each waited until dark. Joseph went outdoors and saw the moon was hidden under a large, dark cloud. He piled into his ox cart 25 bundles of wheat. Meanwhile, David too had been watching the sky, and he too had hitched up his cart and loaded in 25 bundles of wheat. At about 11 o'clock, they started for each other's houses. Joseph had not gotten far before he thought he heard a strange creak, strange noise. There was a creak, as in wagon wheels turning. Then there was silence. Just then the moon came out from under the cloud, and the 2 brothers saw one another, each with a cart full of wheat. And then they knew why their barns had remained full, no matter how much they gave away. And then when I tell this story to the children, I say, where do they build their church? And our perceptive children say, of course, where the brothers met each other. And then I probe a little further, and where else would they build this church? Oh, at the corner of Clinton and Court Street. And we'll call it the First Universalist Church of Rochester. And then I remind them that love is something if you give it away. End story. If you remember it, you can tell the children in your lives. And so now I invite you into this reverent time for sharing joys and sorrows. If you'd like to do so, you can place your hand over your heart to be able to listen from this heart-centered place. And as we place stones in the bowl, I will read aloud the joys and sorrows of our gathered community, and those joining online are invited to share your joys and sorrows in the chat. This is always a good test of my ability to read handwriting. Hal Bauer says Leo, his grandson, is recovering from an illness. We're glad to share that with Hal. A sorrow from someone in our congregation, I'm sure shared by many of us. The local violence is very troubling. I believe that we now have the highest murder rate per capita of any city in the USA, a troublesome sorrow. A joy from Ann Rhodey and William Teague are happy to welcome a new grandchild, Genevieve, on November 1st. Congratulations. Catherine Coates presents a joy. I don't have to have back surgery. Joanne Connolly, a sad goodbye to I'm trying to read here. My only companion last Saturday, I can't read this, I'm sorry. A dog companion last Saturday. My house feels empty, but my heart is full. Nukum Losh, a joy that I came through my knee surgery okay, and rehab is really going well. And a joy from Shirley Malone, who reports on a granddaughter. Her granddaughter, Tia Malone Bonacci, last Saturday, November 6th, won first place in the level 5, section 5 tournament in cross country racing. Yesterday, November 13th, she won third place in New York State cross country race. There were over 300 runners last week and around 100 yesterday. And I, as a fan of the HHT track team, have seen her run, and she is amazing, her persistence. So we share that joy with Shirley. And we drop one final stone into the bowl to represent all the joys and sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May all be held in the heart of love. And today, we light a white candle to acknowledge that we are a community affected by grief, loss, and fear of living through a pandemic. May this candle flame hold our experiences around this horrific disease, and may its light be a beacon of hope and a reminder that we are not alone. And now I invite you to get comfortable in your pews or in your seats and couches and so forth at home. Settle down, take a few deep breaths, and please join me in the spirit of meditation, a meditation that will be interspersed with singing our song of the month, and we be filled with loving kindness. You will hear some music, undertone. I will speak, share some words, then we will sing. May we be filled with loving kindness. Let us be in meditation together. There is something difficult about this particular time, in this particular climate, in this particular point of history. I feel it in myself. I sense it in those about me. I am just a little more impatient than usual. I am more often on edge. My spiritual resources feel depleted. I have pandemic fever. Let us sing to one another. Partly it is the weather. Partly it is an election aftermath. Partly it is nature that speaks back to us. Partly it is a pandemic that seems to have no end. We grow tired with the work we have to do and see no end to it. There are the tensions of an endless political mean season. Politicians pander, citizens protest, people are angry. There is malaise in the land. What to do? May we be filled with loving kindness. Enjoy the spectacle of autumn which surrounds us. Read a good book. Talk with your legislators. Work on saving the world. Come to church, even if virtually. Remember, you can't save the world in a day. Be a little more patient with one another. Pandemic fever, too, will pass away. May we be filled with loving kindness. I invite us now into a time of silent meditation. Our reading this morning is from Clarissa Pinkola Estes. We were made for these times. Letter to a young activist. My friends, do not lose heart. We were made for these times. I have heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They are concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. Ours is a time of almost daily astonishment and often righteous rage over the latest degradations of what matters most to civilized, visionary people. You are right in your assessments, yet I urge you, ask you, gentle you, to please not spend your spirit dry by bewailing these difficult times. Especially, do not lose hope. Most particularly because the fact is, we were made for these times. Yes, for years, we have been learning, practicing, been in training for, and just wailing to meet on this exact plane of engagement. I grew up in the Great Lakes and recognize a seaworthy vessel when I see one. Regarding awakened souls, there have never been more able vessels in the waters than there are right now across the world. And they are fully provisioned and able to signal one another as never before in the history of humankind. There will always be times when you are discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life, but do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to eat from my plate. The reason is this: in my uttermost bones, I know something, as do you. It is that there can be no despair when you remember why you came to earth, who you serve, and who sent you here. The good words we say and the good deeds we do are not ours. They are the words and deeds of the one who brought us here. In that spirit, I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are for. Here ends the morning reading. A few years ago, I received a postcard from the members of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Missoula, Montana. They had been using my sermon subscription series for their Sunday services. I was especially interested in one message on that card. It read, "Thank you for your soul-filled fanaticism. Blessings." Who, me? Soul-filled and fanaticism? I've always thought of myself as, well, rather cerebral, with only occasional bursts of passion and even rarer showings of soul. But fanaticism, I never thought of myself quite that way. My self-image is that of the prophetic preacher, I hope, socially active preacher, trying to follow the practice of the prophets of old who spoke truth to power. I refuse to get very passionate about Mick spirituality, junk food for the soul, or a fillet of soul. I am a fan of the UU theologian James Luther Adams, who said, "The church is a spiritual center with a civic circumference." A spiritual center with a civic circumference. And so the deeper I probed, the more I began to see what this Missoula group was saying. And I began to see my soul as connected with my society, bridging the gap. I began to translate soul-filled fanaticism with the term engaged spirituality. Engaged spirituality comes from the Buddhist tradition, which links the individual soul to action in the world. It is not that spirituality and action are separate entities. They are, in fact, melded in human beings. And that insight made me think of particular human beings who embody this engaged spirituality. Such reformers have inspired me to critique the very system in which I live and move and have my being and have reasonably well prospered. At times, I have even disturbed congregations with my interpretation of what that means, living in a democracy as I do. After all, our fifth principle as Unitarian Universalists speaks of the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. Democracy, then, is a religious principle. There are times when I would reverse my usual, don't just stand there, do something, to a more reflective, don't just do something, stand there. And I happen to think this is good advice, and I even heed it once in a while. In fact, today I would simply stand there or here and share some of my thoughts on the intersection of the soul and the current state of our democracy. How has engaged spirituality informed me? Spirituality has been defined in this way: to separate the essential from the non-essential. Simple enough, but not really. Definitions pale and are inadequate before the actual embodiments of the spiritual. And so I introduce to you 4 embodiments of engaged spirituality, 4 people I knew fairly well and in different ways, as you will see. They have challenged me to go and do likewise. I think of the story of the man from Maine who was asked if he believed in infant baptism. And he said, "Infant baptism? Believe in it. I've seen it done." Believe in engaged spirituality? I've seen it done. This inner compulsion to change the world has no greater example than the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. Nhat Hanh, who died just over a year ago. It was he who originated the term engaged spirituality. As a monk in Vietnam, he chose a third way between the American-supported South and the communist-supported North. Nhat Hanh practiced Buddhist right living in a cooperative society, both in his native Vietnam and in the Plum Village in France. In May of 1967, I had dinner with Nhat Hanh in Ithaca at the invitation of a member of the congregation I served in, George Cahan, who was chair of the Southeast Asia Studies Department. George was a militant opponent of the war, had written a brilliant book opposing that war, and he had invited Nhat Hanh to come to the Cornell campus and thought I might enjoy meeting him. I did. Nhat Hanh was a diminutive figure who looked so thin and frail that he could be blown away by a brisk Cayuga Lake wind. Yet his very body exuded charisma. His voice was soft, yet compelling. His views of war and peace were convincing. And I was impressed by his spiritual presence, as well as by his staunch advocacy for human rights and peace. And I wondered, how could he be so centered, given where he had lived most of his life in the midst of conflict? These 2 impulses then, the inner spiritual and the outer ethical, met in this diminutive figure. His masterful book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, probably many of you have read it. It has been my meditation Bible. When you wash dishes, be aware that you are washing dishes. When I take my morning walk, I am aware of walking, my feet hitting the pavement, my eyes casting their gaze upon the nature around me. I am becoming aware of walking, of being alive. I become a part of nature in which I move. And when I march to protest injustice, I need to be aware of what I am doing. And to the extent that I have a spiritual discipline, mindfulness is it. Natan goes on. Many people are alive but don't touch the miracle of being alive. You carry Mother Earth within you. She is not outside of you. Mother Earth is not just your environment. And that insight of interbeing, it is possible to have real communication with the earth, which is the highest form of prayer. And then these wise words. Many of us have been running all our lives. Practice stopping. Practice stopping. Natan spent his last days in his native Vietnam and died in November of 2019 at 93. A second Ithaca encounter put me in the presence of another militant mystic who practiced engaged spirituality, the radical priest, Jesuit priest, Father Daniel Berrigan. From 1965 to 1970, I was not only minister of the Unitarian Church of Ithaca, but also UU chaplain at Cornell and Ithaca College. Much to my surprise, Cornell, this Ivy League institution, hired this radical priest to be an associate director of Cornell United Religious Work, which was a religious program on the campus. CURW, as we called it, was called the God Box, across the yard from Myron Taylor Hall, the law school. Interesting connections. For 4 years, I worked with Dan and was deeply moved by what he was and what he did. He spoke with a soft voice, but always underlined those words with sometimes dramatic actions. For example, Dan never locked the door of his apartment. He said, if someone steals from me, they obviously needed it more than did I. I even co-officiated with Dan at a wedding in the Commons at Annabelle Taylor Hall. I, in suit and robe, very formal and all, Dan in a black turtleneck and chinos. I'm sure the bride and groom remembered his words far more than mine. He was not only a prophet, but a poet who wrote extraordinary words. And so I invited him to share some of those words in the pulpit at the First Unitarian Church of Ithaca. One day I found myself walking with Dan up the hill from the draft board where we had an anti-war protest to the Cornell campus. It's uphill, as some of you may know. It was following an anti-draft rally, and two of my chaplain colleagues had turned in their draft cards in war protest, and I was wrestling with my hesitancy to do the same. But as we chatted, Dan told me that soon he was to be leaving town to do something against the war. He did not say what. What followed was the burning of the draft files in Catonsville, Maryland. Years later, a play, The Trial of the Catonsville Nine, was performed for the Rochester Unitarian congregation at my invitation. Dan was played by a student from Colgate Rochester Unity School, who later became a Unitarian Universalist minister. But I digress. After the Catonsville action, Dan was on the lam and pursued by the FBI on their most wanted list, the first Jesuit priest to be so listed, to be so honored, we might say. Agents even came to my office to interrogate me if I knew of his whereabouts. I had no clue. But Dan kept popping up in churches and giving sermons, and then simply disappearing from sight. One of those pop-ups was in Barton Hall on the Cornell campus, the ROTC building. We had planned an anti-war weekend. I was a reader in a peace Passover Seder before about 10,000 people, including, I am sure, a posse of FBI agents, because Dan was rumored to make an appearance, that he would be making an appearance, and he did not disappoint. When the empty chair for the prophet Elijah was referenced, Dan walked into a tumultuous ovation, gave a fiery, well, not fiery, a powerful, impassioned anti-war speech, and then was gone. Eventually, he was apprehended and incarcerated. I had yet another encounter with Dan as he received the Aidan Ballou Peace Prize from the Unitarian Universalist Peace Fellowship, Aidan Ballou being a great non-resistance person of the 19th century, a Universalist. Our final meeting was at Cornell when he returned for a reunion of those who had worked with him over the years. I will never forget his response to one compelling question. Someone from the audience said, "Father Barrican, aren't you ever in despair?" To which he responded, "Despair is a luxury beyond my means. Despair is a luxury beyond my means." That has been my mantra in many discouraging times. Dan Berrigan was a gentleman with a powerful conscience. He exuded more charisma than perhaps anyone I have ever known. His prophetic lifestyle challenged my own rather conventional lifestyle, brought it into question, creating in me a creative tension between celebrating life and serving life. Dan died in 2016 at 94. Nat Hahn and Dan Berrigan are two of those who have deepened my engaged spirituality. But a third exemplar of engaged spirituality may surprise you. Susan B. Anthony. Actually, contrary to what many of you think at my age, I did not know her personally. But I am writing a book about her. No Consorting with Angels, the spiritual life of Susan B. Anthony. Born a Quaker, she joined the Unitarian Church, which I served for 32 years. And so in this book, I'm trying to discover what made her tick over a long lifetime of work for women's rights and social justice. She died at 86, 14 years before passage of the Women's Suffrage Amendment. Her incredible commitment required a spiritual adrenaline that did not dissipate with defeat. Susan B. Anthony did not formulate her theology in any systematic way. She was not even a mystic. However, in my attempted soul gazing, hers was an engaged spirituality that is unmistakable. Many tried to fit her into a traditional Christian category, but failed. And her ally, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, wrote of her, "Every energy of her soul is centered upon the needs of this world. To her, work is worship." In Anthony's letter to spiritualist Annie Besant, she urged her to join the suffrage movement on earth rather than soaring to the stars and consorting with the angels. Anthony's was an engaged spirituality that moved me even as I write about her. Nevertheless, she persisted. Another mantra for my life. A spiritual sage was once asked the question, was there more in his philosophy than meditation and quiet introspection? Was there a place for social action? Oh, yes, he replied, that too. Social action is another way of working on the self. We cheat ourselves if we neglect the spiritual growth that comes through social justice work. My personal mission is to grow a soul, to love and to be loved, and to help repair a broken world. In that statement, the spiritual and the social are not divided. They are part and parcel of what I try to say and do. The one infuses the other. From spiritual gratitude, I set out to change at least one small corner of the world. As I try to change the world, I experience the spiritual. The spiritual and the social are part and parcel of the same movement of the soul. I linger on the bridge that unites them. We Americans are going through a difficult time. Between elections and not quite finished pandemic world, what was the Trump bump of our activism in reacting to the 45th president is in danger of becoming the Trump slump. Many of us are exhausted from those 4 deadly years and the seismic crises they precipitated. Increased income equality, increased inequality, deepened racism and homophobia, to say nothing of the global climate crisis, of which we've been hearing much of late. Anger that was below the surface now has boiled over and seems to be accepted by many. Just to watch the PBS NewsHour every night as we do is enough to make one retreat from the fray. However, it seems to me we cannot and must not become mere injustice collectors, jumping on the grievance conveyor belt and shouting about the coming apocalypse. We cannot abide what seems to be the end of empathy in our nation. And while every day seems to bring another challenge to our democratic way of life, this cannot be the last word. We cannot be apocalyptic. I think of the cartoon of the man in sackcloth walking down the street with a sign that read, "The world is not coming to an end. Therefore, we must suffer along and learn to cope." I agree. We cannot become mere sideline spectators, but instead must be about the business of beating swords into ballots, plowshares into economic justice, treating the earth as a garden to be tended rather than a mine to be exploited, cherishing and defending a woman's right to choose. And we need to persuade the unvaccinated that the supposed freedom they invoke lacks responsibility for their neighbors. We need to build a spiritual infrastructure if we are to create a moral superstructure for our nation. Great ships are moored in the harbor, but that is not what great ships are for. Languishing in the harbor of despair is not what we are for. Democracy, we are learning, is not for the faint of heart. It is fragile and needs constant care. It teeters now on the razor's edge of existence. As one observer wrote, historically, democracy is the exception, not the rule. Who in his right mind would choose the dull responsibilities of democracy over the instant gratification a demagogue will provide? One discouraged soul said, if you want to hear the gods laugh, tell them your plans. Humbled though I am by those words, I prefer to hear the words of Rumi, the Arab mystic. Start a huge, foolish project like Noah. We were made for times like these. And so I leave you with an image that has seared itself into my heart and soul and mind. It is the story of Judy Wells, a friend and ministerial colleague who died on September 28th, 2020, at the age of 77. She and her minister husband moved from Pennsylvania to Oregon to take advantage of the latter state's medical aid in dying legislation. When her suffering from cancer became simply too much to bear, she obtained a life-ending drug cocktail from her doctor. She had so wanted to vote in the 2020 presidential election, but knew that she could not make it that far. And so during the morning of the last day of her life, she wrote 15 letters to Pennsylvanians, urging them to get out and vote. Her spirituality was engaged literally until the last breath of her life, as she died peacefully in the arms of her family. Friends, these are tough times. Many of us have spent a lifetime trying to achieve goals that are now brought into serious question. It is easy to become impatient. Many of us are real tired. But this is no time for despair. It is time for our own version of engaged spirituality, or if you prefer, soul-filled fanaticism. So say Thich Nhat Hanh, Dan Berrigan, Susan B. Anthony, and Judy Wells. What say you? Amen. Our hymn is number 348, Guide My Feet. Please remain standing as we extinguish our chalice flame. Let us read together the words printed in your program, order of service, and on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts. With this message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. As we close our service this morning, I invite you to place a hand over your heart If you're joining us online, I invite you to turn your settings to gallery view and look upon the faces of those with you. For those of us in the room, take a moment to look around at the faces which have gathered here today. As we leave this community of the Spirit, may we remember the difficult lesson that each day offers more things than we can do. Therefore, may we learn to separate that which matters most from that which matters least of all. May we do what needs to be done, postpone what does not, and be at peace with what we can be and do. And let the people of the church say, Amen.